She scrubbed his floors by day, invisible and silent. But by night, she was the very monster he had spent 5 years hunting, and the only savior he had ever known. Silas Vane thought he hired a harmless mute girl to clean his mansion. He didn't realize that the woman pouring his coffee was the legendary Ghost Wolf, the most lethal assassin in the underworld, and he certainly didn't know that the people trying to kill him were the ones living under his own roof. This is the story of a king who fell in love with his sword, without ever realizing she was holding it against his throat. The rain in Seattle didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker. Silas Vane stood before the floor-to-ceiling glass of his penthouse office, the city lights reflecting in his dark, heavy-lidded eyes. He was a man composed of sharp angles and expensive tailoring, the alpha of the Silverback Syndicate, a werewolf pack that had long ago traded forest dens for hedge funds and port authority contracts. But beneath the Italian wool suit, the scars on his back were a roadmap of violence. He checked his watch. 11:45 p.m. "Send the next one in," Silas said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the intercom. His beta, a man named Sterling, with a nose that had been broken 3 times, opened the heavy oak doors. "Boss, this is the last applicant for the live-in position. The agency says she's a special case." Silas turned, a glass of bourbon in his hand. He didn't want a special case. He wanted a ghost. He wanted someone who would clean the blood out of the carpet when a negotiation went south, someone who wouldn't ask questions, and most importantly, someone who wouldn't try to seduce him. The last 3 maids had all tried to climb into his bed, driven by the biological urge to mate with an alpha. He was tired of it. "Send her in." The woman who stepped into the office looked like she would shatter if the wind blew too hard. She was small, drowning in a grey raincoat that was 2 sizes too big. Her hair was a messy knot of chestnut brown, wet from the rain, framing a pale face with high cheekbones and eyes the color of oxidized copper. She kept her head down, clutching a battered file folder to her chest. "Name?" Silas asked, not offering her a seat. Sterling answered for her. "This is Seraphina Cross. She goes by Sarah." Silas narrowed his eyes. "Can she not speak for herself?" "She's mute, sir," Sterling said, shifting uncomfortably. "Trauma, according to her file. Vocal cords are intact, but she hasn't spoken a word in 6 years. The agency vouched for her discretion, said she's the best cleaner they have. Obsessive, invisible." Invisible, that was the magic word. Silas took a step closer to her. The air in the room shifted. His alpha pheromones were oppressive, a heavy, dominating scent of cedar and ozone that usually made humans tremble and weaker wolves bare their throats. Sarah didn't flinch. She didn't whimper. She just stood there, staring at the knot of his tie. "Look at me," Silas commanded. Slowly she lifted her chin. Her eyes met his. There was no fear there. There was a hollowness, a deep, abiding exhaustion, but no fear. It was unsettling. Most people couldn't hold eye contact with him for more than 3 seconds. "You know who I am?" Silas asked softly. "You know what this family does?" Sarah nodded once. "And you know that if you see something you shouldn't, if you hear something you shouldn't, you don't get fired. You disappear." She nodded again. Her face remained a perfect porcelain mask. Silas walked around her, sniffing the air discreetly. She smelled like rain, cheap soap, and something else. Faint, metallic, like old pennies. Iron? No, blood. But it was stale. Probably a cut from shaving or a scraped knee. She smelled human. Painfully, boringly human. "Why do you want this job, Miss Cross?" he asked, leaning against his desk. "It's isolation. You'll live at the Blackwood estate. You leave only when I say you can leave." Sarah pulled a small notepad from her pocket. She scribbled quickly with a cheap Bic pen and turned the pad around. "I need the quiet." Silas stared at the handwriting. It was jagged, rushed. He thought back to 5 years ago, the ambush in the warehouse district. He had been cornered by the Krell pack, 6 wolves tearing at his flesh. He was going to die. And then, the white blur. The ghost wolf, a creature of myth, larger than a dire wolf, with fur as white as bone. It had torn through the Krell assassins in seconds, silent as the grave. It had saved him, dragged his bleeding body to safety, and vanished. Since then, Silas couldn't stand the noise of the pack. He craved the silence that the ghost wolf had left behind. "Sterling," Silas said, never taking his eyes off the girl. "Hire her. She starts tonight." Sarah didn't smile. She just lowered her head, a small, submissive bow. But as she turned to leave, Silas noticed something. Her movement. It was fluid, too smooth. She didn't walk. She glided. Just like a predator, his instincts whispered. "Don't be stupid," his logic countered. "She's a mute cleaning lady in a raincoat." As the door clicked shut, Silas finished his bourbon. He had no idea that the ghost wolf he had been searching for the last 5 years had just walked out of his office with a bucket and a mop. The Blackwood estate was a fortress of glass and steel perched on a cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean. It was cold, modern, and lifeless, exactly how Silas liked it. 2 weeks had passed since Sarah had moved into the servants' quarters on the ground floor. For Silas, it was a strange adjustment. He was used to servants who scurried, who apologized, who made noise. Sarah was a phantom. He would leave his study in a mess of papers and empty decanters, go for a run in the private woods, and return to find the room spotless, the papers organized by date, and a fresh pot of coffee waiting. He never saw her do it. One Tuesday evening, the tension in the house was palpable. Elias Vane, Silas's uncle and the CFO of the syndicate, was visiting for dinner. Elias was a man who smiled too much, his teeth always looking a little too white, a little too sharp. "The expansion into the south is stalling, Silas," Elias said, cutting into his steak. The knife screeched against the porcelain. "Victor Krell is pushing back. He thinks you're weak." Silas swirled the red wine in his glass. "Krell thinks everyone is weak. He'll be dealt with." "Will he?" Elias challenged. "You haven't shifted in 6 months, Silas. The pack talks. They say the injury's from the ambush. They say you're broken." Silas slammed his glass down. The stem snapped, sending wine and shards of crystal flying across the table. "I am the Alpha," Silas growled, his voice dropping an octave, the wolf pushing against his skin. "I do not need to turn into a dog to run this city." In the corner of the dining room, Sarah was standing by the sideboard, holding a pitcher of water. Most humans would have gasped. Most servants would have dropped the pitcher. The sudden violence, the smell of aggressive pheromones, the shattering glass, it triggered a primal flight response. Sarah didn't move a muscle. Her heart rate, if Silas could have heard it over his own rage, hadn't spiked. "Clean this up," Silas barked, embarrassed by his outburst. Sarah moved instantly. She knelt by the chair, picking up the large shards of glass with her bare hands. "Who is this?" Elias asked, looking down at her with a sneer. "New help? She's a scrawny thing." "She's effective," Silas muttered. "Leave her alone." Elias leaned down, his face uncomfortably close to Sarah's. "You have to be careful with glass, darling. It bites." He reached out and deliberately stepped on her hand. Silas saw it happen. The heavy heel of Elias's dress shoe grinding into Sarah's fingers against the hardwood floor. It was a test. Elias was testing Silas's authority, testing the servant's loyalty, just being cruel because he could be. Silas expected a scream, a cry, a sob. Sarah made no sound. Her face went rigid, her jaw locking tight, but she didn't pull away. She stared at the floor, her eyes burning. "Elias!" Silas roared. "Get off her!" Elias lifted his foot, laughing lightly, just checking her reflexes. "She's a quiet one, isn't she?" Sarah stood up. Her hand was bleeding, the knuckles bruised and scraped, a shard of glass embedded in her palm. She didn't cradle it. She simply wrapped a napkin around it, tight, her expression unreadable. She picked up the rest of the glass with her good hand, bowed to Silas, and walked out of the room. Silas felt a surge of nausea, not from the wine, but from the look in her eyes before she turned away. It wasn't the look of a victim. It was the look of someone memorizing a face for later. Later that night, Silas couldn't sleep. The encounter gnawed at him. He went down to the kitchen to get water, hoping the walk would clear his head. The kitchen was dark, lit only by the under-cabinet LEDs. He expected it to be empty. Sarah was sitting at the island. She had a first aid kit open. Silas froze in the doorway, watching her. She had the tweezers in her right hand. She was digging the shard of glass out of her left palm. It was a deep cut. It had to be agonizing. She sat perfectly still. No flinching, no whimpering. She extracted the glass, dropped it on a tissue, and then poured rubbing alcohol directly into the open wound. Silas winced, just watching it. She didn't make a sound. She simply exhaled, a long, slow breath through her nose. Then she did something that made the hair on Silas's arms stand up. She leaned her head back, stretching her neck, and rolled her shoulders. The movement was so fluid, so powerful, it looked like a ripple moving through water. For a split second, the shadow cast on the wall behind her didn't look like a woman in a t-shirt. It looked like the hunched, muscular silhouette of a wolf. Silas blinked, and the illusion was gone. He stepped into the light. "You should have gone to the hospital." Sarah jumped, the first time he had ever startled her. She quickly pulled her hand away, hiding it in her lap. "Let me see it," Silas commanded, walking over. She shook her head, her eyes wide. "Sarah, let me see it." Reluctantly, she placed her hand on the counter. Silas took it gently. His hands were large, rough, engulfing hers. He examined the wound. It was cleaned with surgical precision. "Why didn't you scream?" he asked, his voice low, "when he stepped on you?" She looked at him, then pulled her hand back to grab her notepad. "Screaming doesn't stop the pain." Silas stared at the note. "Who taught you that?" She didn't answer. She started packing up the first aid kit. "My uncle is a cruel man," Silas said. "It won't happen again. You have my word." Sarah paused. She looked at him, and for a moment the mask slipped. He saw a flash of something fierce, something protective in her eyes. It was the same look the ghost wolf had given him 5 years ago, before disappearing into the night. Impossible, Silas told himself. The ghost wolf is a legend, a spirit. This is a mute girl who cleans my floors. "Go to bed, Sarah," he said dismissively. As she walked away, Silas noticed her footsteps were completely silent on the tile floor. Not quiet, silent. He waited until she was gone, then pulled his phone out. "Sterling," he said into the receiver, "run a deeper background check on Serafina Cross. I want to know where she was 5 years ago. And Sterling, don't use the agency. Use the private channels." He hung up, looking at the drop of blood on the counter where she had been sitting. He touched it with his finger, rubbing the crimson liquid. It didn't smell like human blood anymore. It smelled like wild sage, iron, and ozone. It smelled like a storm coming. The summer solstice gala was the kind of event Silas despised but couldn't avoid. It was held at the Grand Venetian Hotel, a neutral ground where the city's crime syndicates pretended to be legitimate business partners. Silas wore a tuxedo that cost more than most people's cars. He stood near the champagne fountain, scanning the room. His security team was scattered around the perimeter, earpieces buzzing. Sarah was there too. Not as a guest, but as staff. The hotel was short-handed, and Silas had insisted she come along to manage his personal needs, ensuring his drinks weren't spiked and his conversations weren't recorded. She wore a standard server's uniform, a crisp white shirt and black vest. With her hair pulled back tight, she looked severe, blending perfectly into the background. But Silas noticed her. He noticed how her eyes darted around the room, not looking at the guests, but at their hands, at the bulges in their jackets, at the exits. "Relax, Silas," Elias said, appearing at his elbow with a fake smile. "You look like you're expecting a raid." "I'm always expecting a raid, Elias. That's why I'm still alive." Around 10 p.m., the lights dimmed for a toast. The head of the Krell pack, Victor Krell, a man built like a vending machine with a shaved head, stepped onto the stage. "To prosperity," Victor boomed, raising a glass. As the room chorused, "To prosperity," Silas felt a vibration in his pocket. A text message. "Unknown number. 12 shooters. Roof and kitchen. Get out." Silas frowned. He looked around. Who sent this? He caught Sarah's eye across the room. She was holding a tray of empty flutes, standing near the kitchen doors. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the ceiling vents. Then the first shot rang out. It wasn't a loud bang. It was a suppressed thwip that shattered the champagne glass in Silas's hand. Chaos erupted. "Get down!" Silas roared, tackling a waitress to the ground as bullets began to chew up the expensive marble floor. Men in tactical gear rappelled from the skylights. The kitchen doors burst open, and heavily armed mercenaries poured out. It wasn't a raid. It was an execution. Silas scrambled behind a heavy oak bar, pulling his handgun from his shoulder holster. He fired 2 shots, dropping 1 attacker, but he was pinned. His security team was overwhelmed, caught off guard. "Sterling!" Silas shouted into his comms. "Status! We're cut off, boss!" "They blocked the exits. It's a kill box." Silas peeked over the bar. 3 mercenaries were advancing on his position, rifles raised. He had 6 bullets left. This was it. The ambush in the warehouse all over again. Then the lights went out. Total darkness. For a second, there was silence. Then a sound that chilled the blood of every man in the room. A low, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It wasn't the growl of a normal wolf. It was the sound of tectonic plates grinding together. Screams began. Rip, snap, thud. Muzzle flashes lit up the room in strobe light bursts, revealing glimpses of a nightmare. In one flash, Silas saw a mercenary flying through the air as if hit by a train. In another, he saw a blur of white fur moving faster than the eye could track. In a third flash, he saw the server, Sarah, standing in the middle of the chaos. But she wasn't hiding. She was moving. She had ripped the leg off a heavy wooden table and was wielding it like a bow staff. She spun, the wood cracking against a mercenary's helmet with a sickening crunch. She moved with impossible speed, dodging bullets by mere millimeters, using the attacker's own momentum to throw them into walls. She wasn't shifted. She was in human form. But her eyes... In the strobe light, her eyes were glowing a luminous, radioactive gold. A mercenary lunged at her with a knife. Sarah didn't even look. She caught his wrist, twisted it until the bone snapped, and kicked him so hard in the chest that he flew backward into the champagne fountain. She was dancing through the violence. It was brutal. It was efficient. It was beautiful. "Boss, to the service elevator!" Sterling had breached the side door. Silas snapped out of his trance. He sprinted toward the exit, firing cover shots. He looked back one last time. Sarah was surrounded by 5 men. She dropped the table leg. She looked directly at Silas, her glowing eyes locking onto his. Then she threw her head back, and a partially shifted roar erupted from her throat, a sound that shattered the remaining windows. The white mist began to rise from her skin. The transformation. Silas was shoved into the elevator by Sterling. The doors closed, sealing the carnage behind them. "Did you see that?" Sterling gasped, pressing the button for the garage. "What the hell was that?" Silas leaned against the metal wall, his heart hammering against his ribs. He knew exactly what that was. That, Silas whispered, was the ghost wolf. The drive back to the Blackwood estate was silent. Silas sat in the back of the armoured SUV, his mind racing. Sarah was the ghost wolf. The mute servant girl who cleaned his toilets was the legendary assassin who had saved his life 5 years ago. Why? Why hide? Why work for him as a maid? When they arrived at the estate, Silas ordered the security team to lock down the perimeter. No one in or out, except her. He sat in the living room, a gun on the table, waiting. It took 2 hours. The front door opened. Sarah walked in. She looked like she had been through a meat grinder. Her uniform was shredded. She was covered in blood, most of it not hers. She was limping heavily, dragging her left leg. She stopped when she saw Silas sitting in the armchair, facing the door. She didn't try to run. She didn't try to hide. She just stood there, dripping blood onto his expensive rug, clutching her side. "You're late," Silas said, his voice devoid of emotion. Sarah looked at him. The gold had faded from her eyes, leaving them that dull copper color again. She looked exhausted. "Sit," Silas commanded. She limped over to the couch and collapsed. She pulled her notepad out, but her hands were shaking too badly to write. "Don't bother with the notes," Silas said. "I know you can speak. The ghost wolf isn't a mute." Sarah froze. She looked up at him, fear flickering in her eyes for the first time. Not fear of him, but fear of being known. "Speak to me, Sarah," Silas demanded, his voice cracking. 5 years. I looked for you for 5 years. Why are you scrubbing my floors?" Sarah opened her mouth. Her throat worked, dry and unused. When she finally spoke, her voice was raspy, like dry leaves scraping over concrete. "Because," she croaked, then coughed, "because hiding in plain sight is the only way to stay alive." Silas stood up and walked over to her. He knelt in front of her, ignoring the blood and filth. "Who are you hiding from?" "Everyone," she whispered. "The High Council. The rogues. My father." Silas felt a chill. "Your father?" "My name isn't Seraphina Cross," she said, closing her eyes. "My name is Lyra Blackwood." Silas recoiled as if he'd been slapped. "Blackwood, as in Titus Blackwood? The Alpha of the Northern Prime." "He wanted a weapon," she said, tears leaking from her eyes. "He didn't want a daughter. He experimented on me, used ancient magic to bind a spirit wolf to my soul. It made me strong, too strong. I killed my first squad when I was 10. She looked at her hands. "I ran away 5 years ago. I saved you that night because you were the first alpha I saw who fought for his pack, not just for power. I saw you take a bullet for your beta. My father would have used his beta as a shield." Silas stared at her. The Northern Prime was the most brutal pack in the country. Titus Blackwood was a monster. And this girl, this broken, beautiful thing, was his creation. "So you became a mute servant," Silas said softly, "to disappear." "No one looks at the help," she said with a sad smile. "I could watch over you, protect you, without you knowing." "Why protect me?" Sarah looked deep into his eyes. "Because you are the only good thing in this world, Silas Vane. And I am the monster that keeps the dark away." Silas reached out and touched her face. She leaned into his palm, closing her eyes. "You're not a monster," he said firmly. Suddenly the front door burst open. Sterling ran in, his face pale. "Boss, we have a problem, a big one." "What is it?" Silas stood up, shielding Sarah with his body. "The news," Sterling panted, pointing to the TV on the wall. "Someone leaked the footage from the gala." Silas grabbed the remote and turned on the screen. The headline blared, "Mystery Wolf Slaughters Mercenaries at Gala." The footage was grainy, but clear enough. It showed the white wolf tearing through the attackers. And then the anchor's voice cut through the room. "Sources identify the creature as a rare spirit wolf. A bounty of $50 million has just been posted on the dark web for the capture of the beast. Alive." Sarah stood up, swaying. "They know," she whispered. "My father will see this. He's coming." Silas turned to her. He saw the terror in her eyes. But he also saw the fire. He took her hand. It was bloodied, scarred and trembling. He squeezed it tight. "Let him come," Silas growled, his alpha eyes flashing red. "He thinks you're a runaway weapon. He's about to find out that you belong to me now." He turned to Sterling. "Call the pack, every single one of them. Arm the perimeter. If Titus Blackwood wants her, he'll have to burn this city to the ground to get to her. Sarah looked at Silas, shock registering on her face. You would fight the Northern Prime? For me, a servant? Silas pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her blood-soaked frame. He kissed the top of her head. You're not a servant, Lyra, he whispered into her hair. You're the queen, and it's time you took your throne. The Blackwood estate transformed overnight. What was once a cold, modernist mansion was now a fortified bunker. Steel shutters descended over the glass walls. Snipers from the Silverback Syndicate were positioned on the roof, their thermal scopes scanning the tree line. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating. Silas stood at the head of the mahogany table in the war room. The 12 captains of his pack sat around him, their faces grim. Titus Blackwood is crossing state lines, Silas announced, pointing to a digital map. He has brought the Northern Prime's elite guard. They are 40 miles out. We should hand her over, grumbled Jackson Reed, a scarred captain who ran the port operations. We are businessmen, Silas. We don't fight wars for stray dogs, especially not for the daughter of Titus Blackwood. She is a walking nuke. Silas didn't shout. He didn't growl. He simply leaned forward, placing his hands on the table. She is not a stray. She is my mate. The room went dead silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop humming. Sarah, standing in the corner in fresh clothes, tactical gear Silas had provided, gasped audibly. She hadn't known. Mate? Jackson sputtered. You haven't even marked her. She's a mute cleaning lady. She is the ghost wolf, Silas corrected, his voice lethal. And she has saved every single one of your lives. Who do you think took out the snipers at the docks last year? Who do you think left the evidence of the rat in the accounting department on my desk? He looked at Sarah. She has been protecting this pack from the shadows for 2 years. If you want to hand her over, you have to go through me. Jackson sat back down, cowed. Understood, Alpha. We fight. After the meeting, Silas found Sarah on the balcony, looking out at the stormy ocean. The wind whipped her hair around her face. You called me your mate, she said. Her voice was stronger now, though still rough. It's the only way they would fight for you, Silas lied. Or maybe it wasn't a lie. He didn't know anymore. Sarah turned to him. My father, he doesn't just want me back. He wants the spirit wolf, the entity inside me. He plans to extract it and put it into himself. It will kill me. Silas stepped closer, wrapping his jacket around her shoulders. How does he control it? A frequency, Sarah whispered. He has a device, a sonic emitter. It paralyzes the wolf spirit. If he gets close enough to use it, I can't shift. I can't fight. I'm just a human girl. Silas took her face in his hands. Then we don't let him get close. I have hired a contractor, a specialist. Who? Caleb Stone, Silas said. Ex-military, private security consultant. He's rigging the perimeter with sound dampeners and frequency jammers. Titus's toys won't work here. Sarah stiffened at the name. Caleb Stone? The mercenary? He's the best. He owes me a favor. Sarah looked uneasy, but she nodded. She trusted Silas. That night, Silas didn't sleep in his room. He stayed in Sarah's quarters, sitting in a chair by the door while she slept. He watched her chest rise and fall, marveling at the creature beneath the skin. She whimpered in her sleep, nightmares of cages and needles. Around 3 a.m., Silas's phone buzzed. It was a text from Elias, his uncle. Elias, meet me in the library. I have information on Titus's attack plan. Came from a mole. Silas frowned. He checked his gun and quietly left the room, locking it from the outside to keep Sarah safe. He walked through the darkened hallways to the library. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Where were the guards? He pushed open the library doors. Elias was sitting in a high-backed leather chair, swirling a glass of scotch. But he wasn't alone. Sitting across from him, cleaning a jagged combat knife, was Caleb Stone, the security consultant Silas had just hired. What is this? Silas asked, his hand hovering over his weapon. Caleb, why aren't you on the perimeter? Caleb didn't look up. Perimeter's down, boss. Frequency jammers are offline. Silas's blood ran cold. He looked at Elias. What did you do? Elias took a sip of scotch. I made a business decision, Silas. Titus offered us a deal. We give him the girl, and he gives us the northern shipping routes. It's $1 billion merger. She's my mate, Silas roared, drawing his gun. She's a liability, Elias shouted back, standing up. You're obsessing over a weapon. You've endangered the whole family for a girl who used to scrub your toilets. Silas pulled the trigger. Click. No bang. Just a dry click. Caleb Stone chuckled. I swapped your mag, Alpha. Can't have you hurting the client. The client, Silas realized with horror. Titus is already here, Elias said calmly. He's been inside the gates for 10 minutes. A scream echoed through the house. It came from the servants' quarters. Sarah! Silas screamed. He didn't think. He didn't strategize. He lunged at Caleb. Caleb, a human, was fast, but Silas was an alpha in a rage. Silas took a knife to the shoulder but managed to slam Caleb's head into the heavy oak desk. Caleb crumpled. Silas turned to Elias. His uncle held up his hands. Silas, don't! Silas backhanded him with enough force to dislocate his jaw. Elias flew across the room and hit the bookshelves. Silas sprinted out of the library. He ignored the pain in his shoulder. He had to get to her. But as he reached the hallway leading to her room, he skid to a halt. The hallway was filled with soldiers in black armor, bearing the crest of the Northern Prime, and in the center of them stood a man who looked like a mountain carved from granite. Titus Blackwood. He was holding Sarah by the throat. She was dangling off the ground, clawing at his hand. Her eyes were glowing, trying to shift, but Titus was holding a small, pulsating silver device against her temple. She was seizing, unable to transform. Hello, Silas, Titus said, his voice like gravel. I believe you have something that belongs to me. Put her down, Silas snarled. He could feel his own wolf tearing at his mind, demanding to be let out. He shifted partially, claws elongating, canines extending, eyes burning crimson. An impressive display, Titus sneered. But you're a businessman, Silas. You've forgotten what real war looks like. Titus threw Sarah to the floor like a rag doll. She gasped for air, curling into a ball. Run, Silas, she wheezed. Trap. I'm not leaving you, Silas said. He charged. It was a mistake. The soldiers didn't fire bullets. They fired nets, weighted, electrified nets made of silver-infused mesh. Silas tore through the first one, his claws shredding the metal. But there were too many. 3 nets hit him at once. The voltage surged through his body, locking his muscles. He crashed to the floor, convulsing. Titus walked over and placed a heavy boot on Silas's chest. He leaned down, his face inches from Silas's. You thought you could hide the ghost wolf, Titus whispered. She is the apex predator. She belongs in a cage until I need her to kill. You tried to make her a pet. I loved her, Silas gritted out through the pain. Titus laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Love is for humans. We are wolves. He turned to his men. Bring her. Burn the house. Leave him here to roast. 2 soldiers grabbed Sarah. She fought, kicking and biting, but without her wolf, she was easily overpowered. Silas, she screamed, her voice breaking. Silas! They dragged her down the hall. Titus followed, pausing only to look back at the paralyzed Silas. Goodbye, boy. He dropped a lit flare onto the carpet. The fire spread instantly, fueled by the accelerant the soldiers had sprayed earlier. The flames licked up the curtains, the walls. The heat became intense within seconds. Silas lay trapped under the silver nets, his body refusing to obey him. The electricity was fading, but the weight was immense. He watched the fire surround him. He could hear Sarah's screams fading as they dragged her out to the waiting convoy. Failure. The word echoed in his mind. He had failed her. He had trusted the wrong people. Elias, Caleb. He closed his eyes, the smoke filling his lungs. This was how it ended. No. A voice spoke in his head. Not his voice. It was ancient, primal. Get up. Silas's eyes snapped open. He wasn't just an alpha. He was a survivor of the warehouse ambush. He was the man the ghost wolf had chosen. He focused on his anger, not the hot, flashy anger of the fight, but the cold, deep rage of betrayal. He thought of Elias selling him out for a shipping route. He thought of Sarah's terrified face. He let the wolf take over completely. With a roar that shook the burning beams of the ceiling, Silas forced the shift. The pain was excruciating as his bones rearranged under the weight of the silver nets. The silver burned his skin, searing the flesh, but he didn't care. He grew, his suit shredded. Fur the color of midnight burst through his pores. He was a massive black wolf, larger than any normal alpha. With a heave of pure adrenaline-fueled strength, he snapped the silver cables of the net. He was free. The house was a furnace. Beams were falling. He leapt through a wall of fire, crashing through the glass doors onto the lawn. The convoy of SUVs was already moving down the driveway. Silas didn't stop. He ran. He ran on 4 legs, his paws tearing up the earth. He bypassed the driveway, cutting through the dense forest, taking the shortcut to the main road. He moved like a shadow, ignoring the burns on his flank, ignoring the blood dripping from his shoulder. He reached the canyon curve, a sharp turn on the cliffside road that the convoy had to pass. He waited in the bushes, panting, his yellow eyes fixed on the asphalt. The lead car appeared, then the second, then the third, the armored transport where Sarah was. Silas didn't howl. He didn't signal. As the armored truck rounded the bend, Silas launched himself from the cliffside. He was 180 pounds of muscle and fury. He smashed through the windshield of the driver's side, his momentum carrying the truck off course. The truck swerved, tires screeching, and slammed into the guardrail. It flipped, rolling twice before coming to a stop on its roof, sparks showering the night. Silas was thrown clear, landing hard on the asphalt. He shifted back to human form instantly, naked and bleeding, adrenaline the only thing keeping him upright. He staggered towards the overturned truck. The back doors were dented. He ripped them open with his bare hands, the metal groaning. Inside, the guards were unconscious or dead. Sarah was hanging upside down in her seatbelt, blood trickling down her forehead. The sonic device lay smashed on the floor. "Sarah!" Silas choked out. She opened her eyes. She saw him. "You came," she whispered. "I told you," Silas said, reaching in to cut her seatbelt with a piece of broken glass. "I'm not leaving you." He pulled her out of the wreckage. They stood on the dark road, the burning wreckage of the convoy behind them. But it wasn't over. A spotlight hit them. A helicopter rose from the canyon below, its rotors chopping the air. A loudspeaker boomed. "Stand down, or we open fire." It was Titus. He wasn't in the convoy. He was in the air. And on the road, blocking their escape, 3 more SUVs pulled up. Dozens of soldiers poured out. Silas looked at Sarah. She was weak, injured. He was burned, exhausted. "We can't fight them all," Sarah said, her voice trembling. Silas looked at her. He took her hand, interlacing his fingers with hers. "We don't have to fight them all," Silas said. "We just have to survive." He looked at the edge of the cliff. Below them was the raging river, swollen from the storm. "Do you trust me?" Silas asked. Sarah looked at the drop. It was 200 feet. She looked back at Silas. "With my life." "Then jump." As the soldiers opened fire, Silas and Sarah turned and leaped into the void, falling into the black abyss below, just as the bullets chewed up the asphalt where they had stood. 6 months later. The official police report filed by the Seattle PD stated that Silas Vane and an unidentified female associate died in a vehicle accident on Route 9, their bodies swept out to sea by the storm currents. Titus Blackwood believed it. He had the wreckage of their armored truck towed to the front lawn of the Silverback estate as a trophy. With Silas dead, Titus didn't just take over the city, he suffocated it. He absorbed the Silverback pack, executing anyone who showed loyalty to the old Alpha. Elias Vane, the traitorous uncle, was installed as a puppet governor, running the day-to-day operations, while Titus prepared for his ultimate goal, expanding the Northern Prime Empire to the entire west coast. The city grew cold. The streets were patrolled by Titus's soldiers. Hope was a forgotten concept. But then the whispers started. It began at the docks. A shipment of Titus's weapons vanished overnight. The guards weren't killed. They were found tied up, stripped of their gear, with a single white wolf hair left on their chests. Then the financial sector. Elias's bank accounts were drained. Every cent of the dirty money was transferred to charities for wolfless runaways. The ghost was back. It was the anniversary of the pack's founding. Titus held a massive ceremony in the great hall of the occupied Blackwood estate. He sat on Silas's old chair, which he had upholstered in white leather. Elias stood nervously by his side. The room was packed with 300 wolves, a mix of Titus's soldiers and the subjugated Silverback members. "Tonight," Titus bellowed, raising a chalice of wine, "we celebrate the eradication of weakness. The vein line is ended. The ghost wolf is dead. The North rules the West." The crowd cheered, though the Silverback wolves stayed silent, heads bowed. Suddenly the lights in the great hall flickered. A high-pitched feedback whine screeched through the speakers, causing everyone to cover their ears. Then a voice cut through the static. It wasn't a growl. It was a woman's voice, clear, melodic, powerful. "You are sitting in my husband's chair, Titus." The heavy double doors at the end of the hall swung open with a bang that shook the dust from the chandeliers. Silas Vane walked in. He looked different. The expensive suits were gone. He wore dark combat fatigues, his hair longer, a jagged scar running from his jaw to his collarbone. He radiated power, not the controlled power of a CEO, but the raw, unchecked power of a warlord. "He's alive!" someone whispered. "Kill him!" Titus screamed, standing up. "Kill him now!" 50 of Titus's elite guards drew their weapons and charged. Silas didn't flinch. He didn't even slow down. He simply stepped aside. From the shadows of the balcony above, a white blur descended. Sarah landed in the center of the charging guards. She wasn't wearing a maid's uniform. She was dressed in white tactical leather, dual karambit blades gleaming in her hands. Her eyes were glowing that blinding, radioactive gold. She moved like a hurricane. The first guard didn't even see the blade that severed his hamstring. The second was knocked unconscious by a spinning kick that defied gravity. Sarah was a whirlwind of violence, a perfect synchronization of human skill and spirit, wolf speed. She wasn't killing them. She was dismantling them. "The ghost wolf!" a Silverback soldier shouted. "She fights for the vein!" That was the spark. The subjugated Silverback wolves, seeing their true alpha alive and the legendary ghost wolf fighting for them, roared in unison. They turned on their northern oppressors. The great hall dissolved into total anarchy. Silas strode through the chaos, knocking men aside with brutal punches, his eyes locked on the stage, locked on Titus. Elias Vane tried to run, scrambling toward the back exit. "Sterling!" Silas shouted. Sterling, who had been pretending to serve drinks near the stage, pulled a shotgun from under a serving tray. He blocked Elias's path. "Hello, Elias." Sterling grinned, his nose crooked. "Boss says you're fired." He knocked Elias out with the butt of the gun. On the main floor, Sarah finished the last of the elite guards. She stood amidst the groaning bodies, breathing hard, her blades dripping. She looked up at the stage. Titus stood alone. He held the sonic emitter device in his hand, a newer, bigger model. "You should have stayed dead, daughter," Titus roared. He activated the device. A wave of sonic force blasted across the room. Wolves dropped to their knees, clutching their ears. Sarah screamed, dropping her blades, clutching her head as the frequency tore at the spirit wolf inside her. "I will rip that beast out of you while you writhe," Titus yelled, jumping down from the stage, a silver dagger in his hand. He advanced on Sarah, who was paralyzed by the sound. Silas was closer, but the sonic waves were affecting him too, forcing him to shift uncontrollably, his bones breaking and reforming. "Sarah!" Silas roared, fighting the pain. Titus raised the dagger over Sarah's chest. "Die!" Sarah looked up. Through the pain, through the noise, she saw Silas fighting to get to her. She saw the man who had hired a mute girl and treated her like a queen. She remembered what he had told her in the cabin during the winter. You are not the weapon. You are the wielder. Sarah let go of the pain. She stopped fighting the noise and embraced the silence within her own mind. The silence she had cultivated for 6 years as a mute. She opened her mouth. She didn't scream. She didn't growl. She sang. It was a single piercing note, a counter-frequency, the spirit wolf's howl, channeled through human vocal cords. The sound shattered the glass of the chandeliers. It cracked the marble floor, and it caused the sonic device in Titus's hand to explode. Titus reeled back, his hand mangled by the shrapnel of his own weapon. The sonic pressure vanished. Sarah stood up. She didn't pick up her blades. She didn't need them. She shifted. For the first time in front of the entire assembly, the white mist enveloped her, and the massive, legendary spirit wolf materialized. It was beautiful and terrifying, standing nearly 5 feet tall at the shoulder. Titus, bleeding and terrified, scrambled backward. No, no! Silas reached the stage. He stood next to the great white wolf, the black alpha and the white ghost. You wanted a war, Titus, Silas said, his voice cold. You lost. The spirit wolf lunged. It was over in seconds. There was no long monologue, no mercy. The ghost wolf tore out the throat of the tyrant who had created her. Silence fell over the hall. Sarah shifted back to human form. She stood naked, covered in blood, shivering. Silas immediately removed his tactical jacket and wrapped it around her. He pulled her into his chest, shielding her from the eyes of the room. He looked out at the sea of faces, northern wolves and silverback wolves alike. Titus is dead, Silas announced, his voice echoing off the walls. The northern prime is dissolved. You have 2 choices. Swear fealty to the silverback and to your new queen, or leave this city before sunrise. One by one, the wolves dropped to one knee. Hail the Alpha, Sterling shouted. Hail the ghost wolf, the pack responded. Sarah looked up at Silas. She reached up and touched his scarred jaw. I missed your voice, Silas whispered, kissing her forehead. I'm never staying silent again, she replied, her voice strong and clear. Months later, the underworld of the West Coast had stabilized. The Silverback Syndicate became known as the Iron Pack, famous for its strict code of honor and its ruthlessness toward human traffickers and abusers. Silas and Sarah Vane were rarely seen in public. They lived in the rebuilt estate, fortified and private. But the legend grew. Crime scene photos from dismantled trafficking rings would often feature a strange symbol carved into the wall, a simple outline of a wolf's head. And in the darkest corners of the city, when criminals thought they were safe, they would tell stories. Stories of a mute servant who became a queen. Stories of an alpha who loved a monster. And the most terrifying story of all, that if you hurt the innocent in their city, you wouldn't hear them coming. You wouldn't see them coming. You would just see the gold eyes in the dark. And then you would be a ghost, too, and that is the legend of the ghost wolf. Some say Lyra Blackwood, Sarah, was just a myth, a story made up to scare rival gangs. But here's the chilling part. In 2024, a massive criminal RICO case in Seattle was suddenly dropped because all the key witnesses vanished, and in the police evidence file, there was a single photo of a blurry figure standing on a rooftop, a woman in a white coat, with eyes that reflected the camera flash in bright, glowing gold. So was it magic? Or was it just the most lethal assassin the world has ever seen, protecting the man she loved? I'll let you decide. If you enjoyed this story of revenge, romance, and brutal justice, smash that like button. It helps the algorithm find more alphas like Silas. Make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss next week's story. The billionaire's nanny was actually a Russian spy. Comment below. If you were Sarah, would you have saved Silas or let him die? I read every comment. Until next time, stay wild